What's going on, everybody? Mark Setzer, HurricaneTrack here. It is now Tuesday, the second day of the 7th month, July, 2024. Good to be back in the office after being on the road for many, many days out in the Great Plains of our great country, trying to study hail, but that's behind us now. We'll dissect everything that we learned, and I'll talk about that more later. Right now, though, it is time to focus on Beryl, the hurricane season in front of us, and what to expect over the next several days as it moves through the Caribbean after devastating, and I don't think that's too strong of a word, devastating parts of the Windward Islands yesterday. We're seeing the scenes come out of there. This record-setting hurricane, and speaking of records, just bear with me here for a second. We already know, you don't have to keep telling us, especially on Twitter, that we don't know what happened 100 years ago, or 200, or a million, or 4 billion. Hey, we know. You don't have to keep telling us. Thank you. We're good. We all understand that no, before recon and satellite, we don't have the best records. So what? It's still a record-setting hurricane. And yes, I also know that records are meant to be broken. So there's that. I don't know what else to say. So I'll quit and we'll keep moving forward. All right? That's quite a start to the update. Yeah? All right. So here's the interactive tracking map. Sometimes you just have to wonder about people. It's like, come on, it's just a record. Relax. It means something, but don't get so worked up over it. And I'll take my own advice. All right, so here we are. It's a Category 5, although I think it's starting to weaken a little bit. I'll show you why I think that in just a moment. Moving off to the west at a fairly brisk clip at 22 miles per hour. Not unexpected because it is July, and the general flow through this part of the Caribbean is usually pretty darn fast. Normally, if we don't have a well-developed hurricane, systems that move through this area, because of this little gauntlet that they have to run where the trades kind of get compressed through here. It's a kind of a complicated explanation as to what happens, but you usually don't get development in here. It's just too hostile, the way the overall winds go through there with these islands and the continent of South America in the way to the south. But when you have a system like Beryl, or Ivan in 2004 as an example, much later in the year obviously, that came through farther to the south, these systems tend to remain intact. All right, so Beryl is going to head towards Jamaica, and the first thing you're going to notice down there is the arrival of swells that will be coming in, and that's also going to be true for any southern-facing area of the island of Hispaniola over here to Cuba, and those swells can bring some tremendous energy that you need to be aware of. All right, so that's the first thing, and then we're going to get, of course, the rain bands coming in. Rain will affect Hispaniola as well, and that is particularly concerning for the Haitian Peninsula. You see how close the center is overall, and you can just deduce as it goes by where that would be. So our friends here, and they're certainly going through a time of it in Haiti, there could be a lot of rain, and that could be very problematic. Storm surge, high wind, power outages, all the unpleasantries that accompany hurricanes. Expect that for Jamaica. Whether or not this little black line here with these numbers, which are categories, in the forecast period, it really doesn't matter where that ends up. It could go right over Jamaica. We could be on the north side of the cone, farther to the south side of the cone of the forecast cone. Doesn't really matter, honestly. You're going to get a lot of rain, wind, and, yes, if the core passes over you, that makes a big difference. But we have to de-emphasize the little dots and calling it. It is the entirety of the hurricane. Trying to educate people to think bigger, because that is exactly what this thing is. It is much bigger than you. After Jamaica, the Cayman Islands could be under threat of hurricane conditions, possibly. Maybe not the entirety of the Cayman Islands, but it certainly is possible, especially if the forecast shifts north more. And the same thing applies. Heavy rains, squally conditions, swells, rough seas. And as I said, tropical storm, hurricane conditions, and then all of that, of course, will be taking place along areas of the Yucatan. And let me bring me back on for a minute, because as I like to say, I want to talk to you, not just at you, not just the narrator here. If you have cruise plans down here, you need to be looking at all of that right now. Be in touch with and communicate with and follow along whatever your cruise line is, Royal Caribbean, Princess, Carnival, whatever. And in fact, a little self-serving promo here. We do a series called Hurricane U, like university, and it's a little podcast, a video podcast. Also, the audio is just fine if you just want to listen to it. And the latest episode is all about cruising during hurricane season with meteorologist Craig Setzer, who works for Royal Caribbean, one of two full-time meteorologists for that cruise line, and it's very helpful. And I'll put a link to it in today's description, Hurricane U, because I know it's cruise season down there and people are stressed. I get it. You have to be proactive and get on this stuff early and try to make it a little bit less stressful. Now, days 4 and 5 over here are obviously where we have the least, what would you call it, certainty or confidence, and that just makes sense. It's 4 to 5 days out. The forecast cone is larger because we are more prone to errors in the forecast track during this time frame. Notice, with all that being said, that Texas over here is in part of the cone. I'll call it the northwest side of it, and I think that's going to increase, and I'll explain why as we go forward. But our friends here along, I'll give you a little teaser, the entirety of the Gulf Coast over here need to be watching Beryl closely. And you might be saying, Mark, I'm over here in Florida. Why would you say that? Hey, that's why you're here, to learn from me, and I will explain, and hopefully you'll go, oh, I didn't think of that. Real quick, this is important. It's the nerdy side to this, but I think it's important. The ACE score, the Accumulated Cyclone Energy. Tweet here from our friend Phil Klotzbach. Given current National Hurricane Center intensity forecast, Beryl is poised to break the record. And yes, we know that records, yeah, we already talked about that, for most ACE by an individual Atlantic storm named in June this weekend. And yes, it does carry over. It was named in June, so all that ACE carries over, and it looks like Beryl could break that record. ACE is the Accumulated Cyclone Energy. It is the equivalent of looking at a basketball team, for example. And you've got 9 players that play that game. 5 on the floor at a time, 9 played, and they all scored very poorly that game, and they lost terribly because of that. Or maybe they still lost, but one player scored exceptionally high numbers, really stood out. That's what we look at with hurricanes. Each one of them expends wind energy, and it gets assigned a value, and that's calculated every 6 hours if memory serves here, and we call that accumulated cyclone energy. The more ACE, the more intense the hurricanes are, and cumulatively, the bigger the season is in terms of energy that has been expended. It's a nerd thing, which is a good thing. Hey, I'll admit it. And we are well ahead of where we should be. This is the climatological curve. This is updated from yesterday, so it's July 1st. And if we extrapolate it out and just look at the table up here, our ACE is sitting at, are you ready for this? For those of you that know, we are at 17 so far, and we're not even supposed to be anywhere close to that. So we are on pace. I mean, look at how that trajectory is right there. Now it'll level off again as we get into some downtime, but Beryl is adding to the ACE score quite significantly, and that is a sign of a very impactful hurricane season ahead of us. We knew this was coming. Well, we knew as best we could. All right? A couple other things. I want to give credit where credit is due. This is from Nick. I found this tweet in the For You part of my Twitter timeline. And I like this little doctored up infographic, as it were, because it really sets the tone. Check out how well our National Hurricane Center, part of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, part of the Department of Commerce. This was the forecast for Beryl several days ago. This is last Friday, right? And the forecast was for Beryl to be right there at 2 p.m. yesterday. Guess where Beryl was 2 p.m. yesterday? That's pretty darn good. That is really good for the track. Intensity, we got a long way to go, and they are working on it. But I just wanted to show you, National Hurricane Center is on the ball for the track. We got to work on that intensity. And like I said, a lot of people working on it. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes here. Moving into the third block of today's update. There's Beryl. Not a very large hurricane, although the wind field has expanded some, and the eye is starting to wink out just a little bit because there's going to be some shear. You can already see that happening over here. We'll look at that closer in just a moment. But what about elsewhere in the tropics? Yes, the dust, to some extent, and dry air did knock down 96L here, which is a good thing. We didn't need another one coming through, so that does not look like it's going to happen. Thank goodness. Because, yeah, we saw the modeling there a few days ago that looked like, are you serious? A 1-2 punch? Beryl is quite enough for us to handle right now. By the way, the remnants of Chris that went in here, a lot of that moisture and energy over Mexico. Another very large amplitude tropical wave coming off. Luckily, it is enveloped in all kinds of dry, stable, warm air in the mid-levels. Dusty Saharan air layer will help keep that at bay, and that's just fine. We have enough to deal with here with Beryl. Close-up of Beryl. Look at the eye there, very well developed. Early at the last frame, still well developed, and the core is very much intact. But we're starting to see some signs that the negative effects in front of Beryl are going to start taking a toll on it. And here's one interesting thing you're starting to see a little bit on the outside. I don't want to make too much of this, but these little arc clouds coming out, outflow boundaries, those are collapsing thunderstorms. That means there's some dry air in here, and that's not good for hurricanes. That tends to weaken them. So you know what to look for in terms of clues. That is a clue that some negative conditions are awaiting Beryl. Now, let me point out something really interesting, too. This is Hispaniola, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, right? And the air comes across like this and down and counterclockwise right towards that center there. And there's an interesting thing that's going to happen as Beryl gets closer and goes by. The down-sloping wind coming off of these mountains here will compress and warm and dry out a little bit, helping to disrupt that heat engine. I just think that's amazing that Hispaniola, the island itself, the geographic feature, has caused hurricanes many heartaches over the eons. You want to talk about what we didn't know in the past? There's something we do know, that any hurricane getting close to Hispaniola has always had some kind of a monkey wrench thrown in there because of that downsloping wind. All right? Really cool to think about that if you really think about it. And another thing I want to point out, too, look, the hurricane is bringing some rain, nothing torrential or crazy, to Puerto Rico and parts of the Virgin Islands, and the swell will be coming out all across this area, emanating out from Beryl, and you need to be ready for that as well. Huge wave energy. And you can see, as we move forward here, some of those negative impacts. This is from Dr. Marshall Shepard. Water temperatures very warm, but the upper level winds are going to start to get rather unfavorable here for Beryl, and that wind shear should knock the intensity down before Jamaica. But as he says, rightfully so, big problem either way, because you've got all those other impacts that I mentioned, the heavy rain, the onshore big-time waves, and some wind. This isn't going to weaken to nothing, but it hopefully won't be a Category 5 or even close to that by the time it does reach Jamaica. So let's kind of slow down a little bit. Again, catching our breath here. We got a lot to discuss, or at least I do with you. What happens after Jamaica? Well, it's a pretty sure bet, as much as we can say that with confidence. In the guidance envelope here, pretty tight, very tight all the way through, really, that we're going to get an impact on the Yucatan. Beyond the Yucatan, now you're starting to see some divergence in the guidance there. It starts to really widen out. Now, that's not the forecast cone. This is just me annotating or drawing on this graphic to show you how stuff starts to spread out. Now, certainly you can see that with your own two eyes, but I just wanted to make it clear. We do start to see some divergence in the modeling as we get out into time. But notice there is more of a clustering now north rather than south. And I think that in this situation, the stronger Beryl is post-Yucatan, the more north it goes. Because it'll be higher in the atmosphere and it'll feel any kind of a weakness on the backside of this big old high that's been sitting over here. And you have your continental high out west. That's just my word for it. It's real hot in California, right? And in the middle, we've got all that unsettled weather. There's severe weather up in the plains. And that's why there's a weakness waiting for it like a magnet over here. And the bigger that magnet is, the more it sort of feels the other magnet. Does that make sense? I hope so. So I think intensity in this situation will help to drive track. And I'll explain further as we look at this. So my favorite part of the atmosphere here for analyzing tropical cyclones, the skeleton layer, that's what I call it, 850 millibars. If it looks intact and beastly and aggressive and all those other terms, fierce, in this layer of the atmosphere, then everything above it is probably pretty much lined up. If you don't have a good skeleton, framework, whatever you want to use for the term there, nothing else matters. It really does not. And looking at the structure of Beryl here, to initialize the model, this is 12Z run of the GFS, the Global Forecast System, and let's use blue to make it pop better. That is a very well rounded, intact Category 5 hurricane. Not hard to miss. So let's see how that looks as we go forward, shall we? It marches on, bobbling back and forth. It's not a straight line. This is 24 hours out, so Wednesday morning getting close to Jamaica, Wednesday afternoon very close to Jamaica, maybe even over Jamaica, right? And then close to the Cayman Islands, and then it gets close to the Yucatan. Now notice, it's not quite as solid as it looks right here. We can all agree to that. The structure looks a little different, but it doesn't look like it's completely shredded away. And it crosses the Yucatan, and this is at 78 hours out, so Friday afternoon, emerges into the southern Gulf of Mexico, and then things start to become really interesting. This is day 4, and then we get closer to day 5, and it intensifies. You see that? That's why this is so important. Does anybody remember a certain H storm in 2017? I do. It was called Harvey, and it did almost the exact same thing. Came off the Yucatan, didn't look like it was going to be much, and all of a sudden the models shifted really quickly for the intensity part and somewhat the track, and it looked like, oh my gosh, we're going to have 2 days, and that thing blew up to Category 4 really fast. That is a big problem, and that is only 126 hours out. Not 10 days. I'm not showing you something, oh, it's in model fantasy land. This is a problem, and if it gets more to the north, I mean, that's already an impact, and some, SpaceX is down there. Somebody get Elon on the phone, right? He knows, come on. But really, being serious, it's a big problem as it is at the mouth of the Rio Grande. If it's even more north, you start bringing into play Corpus Christi, Surfside Beach, Port Lavaca, whatever. And maybe, if it's even more north, God forbid, it could be Houston. We don't know, because look at the changes that we're seeing. There was times when it looked like it could go into Mexico, and it still very much could. But this should start to raise a little bit of alarms for our friends in Texas, because, I think it speaks for itself. And the fact that it really amps up there, that's concerning. I'm serious, I'm showing you. So here's the other part of it. Dr. Marshall Shepard mentioned the shear. This is a great way to look at it. I'm going to let's use the highlighter. Let's use purple so it really stands out. There is your tropical upper tropospheric trough, TUT, and that is shear. That's very bad for hurricanes, good for people. Watch what happens. Now that you can see it, watch what happens. Beryl goes along, starts to feel some of that shear, but it's not right over it. It goes over near Jamaica, all that stuff, weakens a little bit. 991, that's a tropical storm or a weak hurricane, sure. But then what happens? Wait a minute, where'd that TUT go? It kind of pinched off to an upper level low over here, with Beryl sitting over here, and if those align just right, and they're like chess pieces, we could have a big problem, because look what happens. Now, it's anticyclonic flow all around the system. Wait, that's not shear. That's outflow at this point. It just goes away, that negative shear, and then Beryl intensifies quickly there. 994 to the low 970s all the way to landfall in South Texas, right around day 5 to day 5.5. Uh-oh, we could have some problems. So we got to really pay attention to this. The other thing I want you to pay attention to, the swells. And that means even in the Gulf of Mexico. This is the wave energy. I'll put a link to, just follow TAF-B. Do that for me, all right? That's the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch. All those colors down there, that's the wave energy. And my friends, let me go back to the track map over here. That wave energy, remember I talked about Florida? You're going to have problems all through here. Once Beryl even gets to this area and some of that energy comes up through the channel, but once we get into the Southwest Gulf, that energy is going to come out and make its way all the way into the rest of the coastal areas. Bottom line, as I wrap up our update today, Beryl is going to be a problem for the United States. Period. To what extent? Well, that just depends on a lot of factors that we just spent the better part of almost a half hour of me explaining to you. So we got a problem. We got a problem for our friends in Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, the Yucatan, and then either northern Mexico, Texas, maybe both, and then the rest of the Gulf, as I explained, potentially from swell action coming in and those rip currents. This is a huge problem. This is why we have to watch these things and understand the totality of the situation and not what category is it or when records were broken and all that nonsense. It's about how this will impact you. And I say it often, be selfish and ask that question. How will this impact me? And then go from there. All right? I hope that what I have told you today is helpful. Please, one thing you can do for us, our community, and hopefully your friends too, and it's not an ego booster. I've done this for almost 30 years. You know, is 1 billion subscribers a cool thing? Yeah. But I'm not looking for 1 billion subscribers, even 1 million. I don't care in terms of, oh, it makes my ego bigger. But yes, share these videos. If you like what we do here, you like what the information I'm providing is, if it's helpful, absolutely one of the best things you can do is share, subscribe to the channel, and let people know what we're doing over here. We got a great community, and that's a good way to spread, hopefully, helpful information. All right? Just a little, come on, help us out here. Do appreciate it. And, with that, all of us here at HurricaneTrack, we're supported through Patreon. We got a wonderful community out there, thousands and thousands of people around the world that tune into what we're doing, and we appreciate it all very much because I feel like we are all connected by the weather, and we're kind of in this together. Social media can be a truly terrific thing. And on that positive note, I'll bid you farewell for today. I am Mark Setzer, HurricaneTrack. I'll be back with you with another update tomorrow morning.